Let's learn Parshat B'Shalach with our commentator of the year, Rashi. We are in chapter 13 of the book of Exodus, verse 18. Pharaoh decides to let the Jewish people go. Finally, the moment has come, and instead of straight line to the promised land, the Torah reports, Vayasev Elohim et ha'am derech hamidbar yam suf. V'chamushim alu v'nei Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim. God took the people around toward the way of the wilderness of the Sea of Reeds. And the children of Israel were chamushim when they went up from Egypt. I purposefully did not translate chamushim so that we could invite Rashi's commentary to bring us a little understanding of what this term means. You might recognize the root of the word chumash because that's the word we use for the 5 books of Moses, for the books that we read Torah from in our synagogues and from which we study. Keep that in mind. That's not Rashi's first choice, to rely on that root, meaning 5, as in the 5 books of Moses, chumash. Alternatively, Rashi knows the Midrash from Mechilta and says that when the children of Israel left Egypt, Ein chamushim ela mizuyanim. The word chumashim in this context means that they were armed. Chamushim, armed. And Rashi goes further to point out that this lets the entire narrative unfold a little bit easier when it comes to the Israelites' battles that they will have to fight in the future. We might be asking as readers of Torah, where did they get the weapons to fight those wars? So instead of just leaving with silver and gold and borrowed precious metal from neighbors, we get the inside story here. They went out of Egypt with weapons. They were armed. Nichtav ki'im l'saber et ha'ozen. The verse is written to make things comprehensible, to have your ears hear the story, the backstory of what your mind may be wanting to fill in later on when the wars come. Shalot hitma b'milchemet Amalek u'b'milchamot Sichon v'Og u'Midyan mehechan hayu lehem klei zayin. Where did they get weapons for the wars with Sichon and Og and Midian and Amalek? So here we understand that at least a certain number of people were armed and created the military branch of the Jewish people. Interestingly enough, from historical texts and what we might consider the folk literature of the ancient Near Eastern world, there's some suggestion that already Joshua and Caleb might have been part of a more militaristic group of Israelites ready to launch a rebellion. As a matter of fact, one story puts Moses as the leader of an armed rebellion in the middle of Egypt. And they take up their cause, and the Israelite people, the Jewish people, the Hebrews, see this as their moment to go with their leaders and leave Egypt and leave this oppression. Either which way, we might be also asking, was it kosher? Would halacha have allowed, would Jewish law have allowed the Jewish people to take weapons with them? And of course, we know that in the Babylonian Talmud, it says, Haba l'hargecha, hashkem l'hargo, that self-defense is indeed allowable within the tradition. And if someone's rising up to kill you, you have to be prepared to fight a defensive war, a defensive battle. That's taken from another part of the book of Exodus that will soon follow our parsha in Mishpatim, we will learn that im b'machteret yimatze haganav, if a thief is discovered tunneling into your home, v'hu kav mate, and in the middle of the night you rise up in self-defense and you strike him and he is killed, ein lo damim, then a person cannot be held liable. There's no blood guilt on that person, on the homeowner's account. And so this is in Exodus 22. The notion that violence and weapons and military might and self-defense and power are part of the narrative going out of Egypt, of course, carries through right to today. And though we pursue lives of peace, that we hope justice prevails, there is a time when one raises weapons in order to defend one's people, one's family, and one's home. Now, that is not to say that the Torah featured armed rebellion, rioting, and looting, and violent demonstrations like the ones going on in cities across the United States. This is a point to consider when we call upon all leaders of our world to stop all violence, like we've seen recently in Portland, like we've seen recently at the Capitol, like we've seen recently in the hearts and the minds of those who think that the way to get their agenda satisfied is through violent armed rebellion and through those means. And the Torah points out that Amalek attacked from the back, and the Jewish people needed to respond. The peoples of Canaan were invited to join the Jewish people in creating the godly society, and then, and only then, was military action permitted in order to inherit the land God had promised and to drive us forward in a society in which the value of life would be first and foremost. Armed insurrection and rebellion, as pointed out later in Torah with the portion of Korach, who is swallowed up by the earth as God puts down internal violent rebellion, is the point that's made. And of course, this is an essential lesson for our times, where we see too much violence on the streets of what should be peaceful cities. Rashi goes on and says, if you don't like my interpretation that they left Egypt armed, there is another commentary that I want to teach you. Davar acher, chamushim, this word chamushim can also mean echad mechamisha yatsu. Only 1 out of 5 Israelites departed from Egypt. V'arba'a chalakim metu b'shlosha imei afela. And the other 4/5, unfortunately, died in Egypt during the 3 days of darkness. If you'll recall, we looked at a Rashi that said, the darkness, the plague, during the plague of darkness, Jews with little faith were left behind in that tyrannical society and civilization. Not only were they assimilated, but they paid the highest price, according to this commentary. It's a theme that Rashi links between the plague of darkness and when they actually leave Egypt, empowered here to march on to the promised land. As Rashi told us, chamushim, weapons ready should they need to defend themselves. Have a wonderful Shabbat and a celebration of the redemption from Egypt this very Sabbath. Parshat Beshalach. Shabbat Shalom.